Hello everyone, this is Dr. Brian Campbell. I want to take an opportunity to tell you a little bit more about integrated Christian counseling. As I've been discussing this with you, I've told you there are three primary processes that are involved in the cognitive part of the integrated Christian counseling, and that is identifying irrational beliefs, challenging them, and replacing them with the truth, and the truth sets you free. So we've talked a little bit about using forms and things to identify the irrational beliefs that parents teach children, for example. And I'll be telling you more about how we can identify irrational beliefs. But I wanted to focus today on challenging those. In a previous video, I told you about cognitive refutations, how we directly refute or challenge irrational beliefs through use of the scriptures. Well, today I want to tell you about another way that we can challenge irrational beliefs, and that is through questioning and through using appropriate questions to pose to the individuals to help them rethink their irrational beliefs. Before I finish counseling, I want to write a book called Perspectives, because this dovetails into something very dear to me, which is the whole process of helping individuals gain perspective on their lives, standing back, looking at the situation differently. When I was a professor at a university, major university, I used to have a picture on my door, which was a National Geographic picture of a constellation with millions and billions of stars on it, and I had a little bubble that said, "You are here. Keep things in perspective." Well, perspective is very important, and asking questions that call into question our beliefs are important. And we can do that subtly, we can do that directly. I want to tell you a little story about how questioning my beliefs helped change my emotions. One day, I was teaching a class of handicapped individuals in a Methodist church I was attending. And, excuse me, these individuals were not all that well behaved. They were adults, but they still had some behavioral problems. So lo and behold, one day I went to church and they were going to have communion, and I was teaching this class, and I was going to take them into church where I usually had them separately in a Sunday school class. So I get into church and there's going to be communion that day, and I'm thinking, oh no, this is not going to be good. They're going to be throwing the bread, hitting each other with the cups, little plastic cups, and I thought, oh no. So I started to worry, and I started to get anxious, and some of my thoughts were, well, what will the congregation think about me, and gee, this could be an ethical problem. What happens if something seriously happens? Am I going to lose my license? And I started building this up into a big event, and I started getting more and more anxious. I was like on a 8 out of 10 in terms of anxiety by the time I stopped scaring myself. So interestingly, we can see how thoughts can control emotions. I was definitely getting wound up through my wild imaginings there. Then I stepped back and I thought, wait a minute, what would I tell people to do in counseling? So I decided I better rethink this. So I thought, first of all, well, what would Christ do in this situation? Well, that was pretty obvious. The answer to that question was, of course he'd want them to be there. Duh. So that helped. And then I started asking myself more questions. Well, how will this look 10 years from now? Well, if they do throw things it's going to be a funny story probably later on in my life as I tell what happens to me and my foibles. And I have a lot of those, by the way, an awful lot of those in my life that have happened. And someday maybe I'll get to tell you about some of them. But anyway, then I stood back and I said, well, am I overestimating the catastrophe here and underestimating my ability to cope? Well, my goodness, I've dealt with the most violent and aggressive people in the world in South Florida State Hospital as a consultant there, a behavioral consultant. I think I could handle this group of people. Then I said to myself, am I underestimating the help that I'm going to get from other people? Well, my goodness, there's 2 professional pastors there who were going to come down and rescue me even if I didn't know what I was going to do. And as I started asking those questions, my emotions started going down and down and down. The irrational belief that something horrible was going to happen was being broken up by the questions that I was asking myself. And those questions kept helping and helping and helping my emotional state. In fact, by the time I finished asking myself questions, I was sitting there almost smiling, waiting for something to happen because this was going to be great. See how I was going to cope with this situation. I had changed it all in my head from being this fearful thing to being something I knew I would be able to handle. And I knew with God's help, we certainly could handle this situation, and there was no fear whatsoever. Well, and guess what happened? Absolutely nothing. The people were fantastic, and everyone came up to me, instead of questioning my license, came up to me and said, oh, Dr. Kemp, we're so glad. That was so meaningful to us. These people came into church with us and fellowshiped in communion. So I just wanted to give you an example of how questions, how you can teach clients to ask these questions, you can ask those questions too. And part of this has to do with the big picture of perspective. A lot of counseling has to do with standing back, looking at this from a different perspective, looking at your situation from a different perspective. I gave you a little videotape on Nick, the young man who has no arms and legs, who's an unbelievable pastor. Another little picture on perspective here. One day he preached at our church, and I have a horrible condition called peripheral neuropathy that causes me chronic pain. And I take medication for it, and it's very difficult sometimes. Well, the next morning I got up after Nick had taught, and he's unbelievable. You got to watch him. And I was feeling sorry for myself as I was walking to the bathroom. My legs were hurting, my feet were hurting, and then I thought of Nick, and I thought, oh my goodness, Nick would love to have my feet. This would be such a joy for him to have my feet just for one day, even if they hurt. So that perspective helped me throughout the rest of the day. And I think it can help you too. Just keep things in perspective and help your clients keep things in perspective. And ask questions that might help bring about that perspective. God bless.